On the Mongolian steppe, weakness did not survive. Tribes vanished here. Families disappeared. Leaders were betrayed, hunted, and erased long before they ever became powerful enough to matter. And in this brutal world, a young warrior named Temujin was rising. At first, almost nobody feared him. He had no empire, no throne, no massive army waiting behind him. Only a small group of riders trying to survive in one of the harshest places on earth. But the tribes of Mongolia made one catastrophic mistake. They believed he would stay weak. They saw him as just another struggling war leader trapped inside the endless violence of the steppe. What they did not understand was that every betrayal was changing him. Every battle was teaching him. Every enemy that tried to destroy him was making him more dangerous. Because the steppe was not creating an ordinary tribal leader anymore. It was creating a conqueror. And soon, the wars of Mongolia would stop being small tribal conflicts fought across empty grasslands. They would become wars of destruction. Wars that would unite the Mongol tribes through fear, loyalty, and bloodshed. Wars that would transform Temujin into Genghis Khan. But before the world feared the Mongols, before armies thundered across Asia, before entire cities collapsed beneath Mongol invasion, there were the tribal wars, the brutal wars that forged the most feared conqueror in history. And once they began, the steppe would never be the same again. Temujin's rise did not begin with giant armies. It began with a handful of riders trying to survive. On the Mongolian steppe, survival depended on movement, loyalty, and strength. Tribes fought constantly across the open grasslands for animals, territory, influence, and revenge. Raids could begin without warning. Alliances could collapse overnight. A weak leader disappeared quickly in this world, and Temujin knew exactly what happened to weak men. He had already lived through hunger, abandonment, captivity, humiliation. Now, he was trying to build something powerful enough to make sure it never happened again. At first, his following was small, a few loyal riders, friends from earlier struggles, warriors searching for opportunity, men dissatisfied with rival tribal chiefs, not an army, just survivors. But even in these early days, Temujin was already different from many tribal leaders around him. On the steppe, noble blood usually determined status. Temujin cared more about loyalty, more about courage, discipline, usefulness in battle. A warrior who proved himself could rise beside him regardless of family background. That mattered, because across the steppe, many fighters were tired of old tribal systems controlled by powerful clans and unstable alliances. Temujin offered something different, a place where survival and loyalty could lead to power. And slowly, more riders joined him. As his warband expanded, so did the violence surrounding him. These were not giant imperial wars, not yet. The early fighting was smaller, faster, and brutally personal. Horse theft, ambushes, night raids, revenge attacks, sudden strikes across empty grasslands. The kind of warfare that shaped every steppe leader. Mounted combat dominated Mongolia. Speed meant survival. Riders could travel enormous distances quickly, attack without warning, and disappear into the plains before enemies regrouped. Temujin adapted to this world rapidly. His riders became faster, more coordinated, more disciplined, and with every successful raid, his reputation grew. One victory brought more horses, more weapons, more followers, and more attention. Because on the steppe, power never rises unnoticed. Rival tribal leaders began watching him carefully. They saw defeated warriors joining his side. They saw alliances slowly forming around him, and they understood exactly what that meant. If Temujin continued growing stronger, the balance of power across Mongolia could collapse. So the tribes began preparing for war. And across the steppe, the violence was becoming something much larger than scattered tribal conflict. It was becoming a fight for domination. The steppe was breaking apart. Across Mongolia, alliances collapsed one after another. Tribal chiefs betrayed former allies. Old rivalries exploded into open warfare. Raids turned into campaigns. Revenge killings turned into full-scale conflict. And somewhere inside that chaos, Temujin kept growing stronger. Some tribes joined him temporarily, hoping to use his rising power against their own enemies. Others saw something far more dangerous. A war leader who was becoming too successful to control. And across the grasslands, mounted armies began moving constantly. The tribal wars had begun. These battles were nothing like the slow infantry warfare of large kingdoms. On the steppe, speed decided survival. Cavalry units crossed enormous distances rapidly, while horse archers attacked from range, circled enemy formations, and vanished before counterattacks fully formed. Nothing stayed stable for long. A retreat could be genuine, or it could be bait. An ally could remain loyal, or betray you before sunrise. And Temujin was learning how to use that chaos better than the men fighting against him. As rival coalitions expanded, the wars became far more dangerous. Enemy tribes understood that if they waited too long, Temujin's growing power could become impossible to stop. So larger alliances formed against him, combining warriors from multiple tribes in an effort to crush his movement before it expanded further. Several battles nearly destroyed everything he had built. Mounted warriors crashed together across open plains while arrows cut through the sky. Cavalry units attempted flanking attacks. Riders disappeared into the distance before suddenly returning from another direction. The battlefield could change within minutes. Confusion spread constantly during steppe warfare. And when confusion spread, fear followed. If one tribal leader panicked, entire formations could collapse. If one alliance broke apart, the battle could become a massacre. Temujin understood this weakness perfectly. While many rival tribes depended heavily on unstable coalitions and temporary loyalty, his forces were becoming more disciplined with every campaign, more coordinated, more controlled under pressure. That difference became deadly. Again and again, rival alliances began collapsing during battle. Some tribes fled after major defeats. Others abandoned weakened leaders entirely and joined Temujin instead. Every victory increased his momentum, and momentum on the steppe meant survival, influence, and military power. The more he won, the more dangerous he became. Soon, these wars were no longer about simple tribal survival. Now they were about domination, about who would control the Mongolian steppe itself. And by this point, the entire steppe was beginning to understand something terrifying. Temujin was no longer just another tribal fighter struggling to survive the chaos. He was becoming the most powerful war leader in Mongolia. By the final phase of the tribal wars, the entire steppe understood the danger Temujin had become. This was no longer a rising war band struggling for survival. It was a growing military force capable of reshaping Mongolia itself, and the rival tribal leaders knew something terrifying. If Temujin survived these wars, the old tribal order would collapse, so the steppe moved toward decisive conflict. Powerful coalitions formed against him. Rival chiefs combined their warriors, resources, and alliances in an effort to destroy him before his power became unstoppable. Large mounted armies gathered across the grasslands. These were no longer small revenge raids or scattered tribal clashes. This was war for control of Mongolia. The fighting spread across enormous distances. Horsemen crossed freezing plains beneath violent winds while scouts searched constantly for enemy movement. Cavalry units attacked suddenly, disappeared into the steppe, regrouped, and returned again before opponents fully recovered. The wars became relentless, and the steppe itself became part of the battlefield. But while the violence expanded, Temujin's military system was evolving even faster. His forces were becoming more disciplined, more coordinated, more adaptable under pressure. Unlike many rival coalitions held together by temporary alliances and fragile loyalty, Temujin increasingly commanded a force that responded quickly and fought as a unified system. That difference changed everything. When enemy leaders hesitated, his riders attacked immediately. When rival coalitions became disorganized, his forces exploited the confusion before opponents could recover. And when panic spread during battle, entire armies collapsed. One defeat could destroy a tribal alliance completely. Again and again, rival powers began breaking apart after major losses. Warriors abandoned weakening chiefs rather than die beside them. Some tribes switched allegiance to Temujin after realizing resistance was becoming hopeless. Others fought to the end, but one by one, they fell. And as victory followed victory, fear spread across Mongolia. The old balance of power was dying. For generations, the Mongolian steppe had remained divided by revenge, tribal rivalry, and endless warfare. No single leader had successfully dominated the region on this scale, until now. Temujin was no longer merely surviving inside the chaos of the steppe. He was mastering it. The same wars that once threatened to destroy him were now forging something unstoppable, a unified Mongol power built through speed, discipline, loyalty, and fear. And by the end of these campaigns, very few rivals remained capable of challenging him at all. The steppe belonged to him now. After years of war, betrayal, shifting alliances, and military victories, Temujin stood above the tribes of Mongolia. The fighting that had consumed the steppe for generations had produced a single dominant ruler. At a great tribal assembly, leaders and warriors gathered as Temujin received a new title, Genghis Khan, a title that symbolized supreme authority across the Mongol world. For the tribes of the steppe, everything had changed. The old order was gone. The endless divisions between rival clans were collapsing beneath one unified military power. But the most dangerous part of the story had not even begun. Because beyond Mongolia, powerful kingdoms and empires still had no idea what was coming toward them. They did not know that the brutal tribal wars of the steppe had created one of the most feared conquerors in human history. Soon, the Mongols would ride beyond their homeland, and the world itself would begin to burn. If you enjoyed this video, subscribe for the next chapter of the Mongol rise, because the wars of Mongolia were only the beginning.